Hi guys, it's Jasmine Fiction and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a recommendation video where I recommend books based on super specific book tropes. Alright guys, so I asked on my community page on YouTube and then my Instagram stories for you guys to request certain super specific tropes that you really love, and I got so many responses, so thank you all so much who responded. I'm really excited to do this video. Now, I tried to do a good mix of fantasy romance and then like dark contemporary romance. And if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's get into these recommendations. Alright guys, so I have my computer in front of me so I don't miss any tropes. So one of the main requests I received was enemies to lovers and a lot of different variations of that. So just for the basic enemies to lovers, I'm going to say The Zodiac Academy by Peckman and Susanne Valenti. I have a full spoiler-free review of this series I will leave in the cards and in the description. But this is a fae bully romance, and there are two enemies to lovers couples in this book that are just absolutely glorious and I'm obsessed with. So this is following the Vega twins on their 18th birthday. They find out they're fae royalty, and in order to claim their inheritance, they have to go to the Zodiac Academy where they get bullied relentlessly. And it's just a really fun read. The last book of the series is about to come out in December, and I'm so excited. So highly recommend. And then for just contemporary enemies to lovers romance, I have From Lukov with Love by Mariana Zapata. So this is a sports romance, specifically ice skating, and these two ice skaters end up being paired together, and they've always absolutely hated each other, and it's just a really good time. So also, if you're looking for a good enemies to lovers contemporary romance, highly recommend. Alright, so next up we have enemies to friends to lovers. I did find two books for this, and I feel like you guys are not going to like either of these recommendations. So first up we have The War of Two Queens for fantasy romance. I'm not even going to say it because it's a spoiler, but there's definitely an enemies to friends to lovers thing that goes on in this book. And personally, I know a lot of people didn't like this book. I thought it was a really good time. I have a full video on it. I'll leave in the description. But I can't wait to continue on with this series. But yes, that definitely happens in this book. And then for just contemporary romance, we have Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. Totally get, this is not everyone's favorite book by Colleen Hoover. This is her latest release. I really enjoyed it. So it's following this single mother who ends up going to jail when she's pregnant, so she has to give away custody of her daughter. And when she's released from jail, she's just trying to get custody back. So she ends up meeting the neighbor of the people that currently have custody of her daughter, and they hate each other, like absolutely can't stand each other. But slowly they form this friendship, and then that friendship becomes a little bit more. So this is also enemies to friends to lovers, definitely fits that trope, and I really enjoyed it. So definitely give it a try if you haven't yet. Alright, and then last up for enemies to lovers, we have enemies to lovers, but the whole time the male main character is extremely sarcastic and flirty towards the female main character. And I had to go way back in my Goodreads, but I found the perfect book for this, and it is White Hot Kiss by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So this is following Layla, who's been raised by gargoyles her whole life and taught to absolutely hate demons. And then she meets a demon, Roth, and he is so sarcastic and flirty and just fits this trope so well. So this is a really fun series. It is a bit older. It does read like older NA, but overall very fun, and I highly recommend. Alright, so next up we have Everything is Falling Apart, but they are a rock through it all with no drama. So I couldn't find any fantasy romance that really fit this, but I did find two contemporary romance. So first up we have Don't Kiss the Bride by Carrie and Cole. So Jude just takes care of the female main character in this. She is going through having a mother that is very neglectful and an eating disorder. This is an age gap romance, and Jude ends up seeing this girl on the side of the road and ends up marrying her, also marriage of convenience, in order to give her his health insurance. And it's just such a good story, and Jude is just such a rock. And then another one I just read is All In. So this is the sequel to Full Tilt, which is just an emotional roller coaster. So I didn't think I was going to enjoy this book. However, Theo is everything. He takes care of everyone around him, and he's 100% a rock for like all of his relationships. So highly recommend. If you've read Full Tilt, definitely read the second book. It's so good. Alright, so next up we have Grumpy Sunshine. I had a lot of requests for this one. So first up we have The Wrong Heart by Jennifer Hartman. I was not personally a big fan of this book. However, it does fit this trope really well. So it's following Melody, who on her 5-year wedding anniversary, her husband is killed and his heart is given to Parker. And then a year later, Melody ends up meeting Parker and they form this relationship. But Parker and Melody's husband all refer to Melody as Sunshine. She's just very, not happy, but she always has like this smile that like brightens everyone's day. And she's just like inherently good. So it definitely fits the grumpy sunshine trope because Parker is very depressing. However, like I said, not one of my favorite books, but if you're looking for that trope, definitely check that out. And then the other one is When Heroes Fall and When Villains Rise. I'm only adding this one because I think it's so funny that normally when it's Grumpy Sunshine, the grumpy one is the male main character and the sunshine is the female main character. It is reversed. So this is a mafia romance duet by Gianna Darling. And our main female character is this lawyer, and she's just kind of angry with everybody. And then you have this mafia boss who's just so happy. So I really enjoyed this duet. It's probably one of my favorite mafia duets, so highly, highly recommend. All right, so next up we had the one bed trope, which personally is one of my favorite tropes. So I normally would say A Court of Thorns and Roses, specifically A Court of Mist and Fury, and then From Blood and Ash. Both do it very well. However, one of you was so specific, you said one bed trope that isn't ACOTAR or FBAA. So for you, I have Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This is a YA fantasy, the first in the series that follows a witch and a witch hunter that through some comical circumstances, they end up having to be married to each other. And this is also kind of like Grumpy Sunshine. They have two complete opposite personalities, but this book is really fun. I really enjoyed it, and the one bed trope in this is just done super well. And then for contemporary romance, we have The Confidence of Wildflowers, which is part of the Wildflower Duet by Michaela Smeltzer. So this is following Salem, who's an 18-year-old girl. She's about to graduate high school. And then Thayer is a single dad who moves in next door, and they end up forming a relationship. It's age gap. But the one bed trope does happen in this when Thayer and Salem go to a concert together, and they check into the hotel room and find out there's just one bed. So highly recommend if you have not read this duet yet. It is one of my favorites. And next up we have Witty Banter. So definitely book lovers by Emily Henry. Really all of Emily Henry's books have some sort of witty banter, but this one in particular really reminds me of Gilmore Girls. Like the two main characters have that fast-paced, very intellectual talking style that Gilmore Girls has. Personally, not a huge fan. However, if you like Gilmore Girls, you will probably love this. This is following an editor and then a literary agent, and they can't stand each other. And then when the literary agent Nora goes on vacation, she ends up bumping into the editor, and it's a small town romance, very angsty, very fun. Definitely check it out. Next up is the one horse trope. So you would be surprised how many fantasy romance books feature this trope. I picked out 2 books. So first up, we have King of Battle and Blood, and this is by Scarlett St. Clair. So this is following Isolde, who is supposed to marry the king of the vampires in order to save her people. She's also hoping to assassinate him. So personally, I like a little bit more of a drawn-out, angsty romance. This is spicy right from the get, but if that is something you are looking for, definitely pick this up. And the other one is Untainted by Lillian T. James. So I've talked about this book a lot on my channel. I just read it recently, but it's following this girl that is kidnapped when she is 5 years old and taken to this empire where she is raised among humans, and she is trying to pretend to be human, almost to the point where she forgets who she actually is until she bumps into a fae male who is going to set her straight. This also has the one horse trope, and I love it. It's just one of my favorite tropes along with one bed. So good. All right, so the next trope was arranged marriage, which ended up being a little bit harder than I thought. So I've read a lot of books where the person is supposed to be in arranged marriage, but then ends up marrying the brother or the best friend or something of that nature. But actually finding one where there's an arranged marriage and they ended up marrying that person was difficult. But I have 2. So one of them's a little bit of a stretch, and that is For the Wolf, and this is by Hannah Witten. I loved this book. In this world, there are 2 daughters born. One is for the wolf and one is for the crown. And we're following both perspectives of both daughters, or both points of view. But the one that kind of fits this trope is the one that is for the wolf, because after our main character, Red, goes through this like very dark and menacing wood, she gets to where the wolf is supposed to be residing, and it ends up being a guy. And I'm pretty sure they get married at some point. But that kind of fits with this trope a little bit. That's the closest I could come. And the other one, Issa from Fun Fantasy Books, you're going to be so happy I'm going to bring this book up because I haven't talked about like high fantasy in so long. Warbreaker. So Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson is an amazing Sanderson book. I ended up reading it with my husband on audio on this like really long drive. And it's following these 2 girls, Viv and Siri, I think her name is. That might be wrong. And Viv is supposed to marry the God King and to save their people, but then Ciri ends up going in her stead. And that is like the whole arranged marriage trope. So definitely check that out. It is a bit of a chunky book, but Brandon Sanderson just writes like amazing magic systems that are just so complex and so immersive. So highly, highly recommend. If you have not picked up Sanderson yet, definitely do it. Next up, we have Captor Captive, which is one of my favorite tropes. I got a lot of requests for that. So for fantasy romance, I would definitely say A Court of Thorns and Roses, that whole series. And then From Blood and Ash, specifically the first and second book, both feature the Captor Captive trope. They're also just amazing series. I have a ton of content on both those fantasy romances that I'll leave in the cards in the description. But for like dark romance, we have Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin. So this is one of the first Pam Godwin books I ever read. It is so good. It is following this young girl whose father is a pirate and her mother is like this noble lady. And when they both end up dying on the same day, she goes off and becomes a very well-known pirate herself. So while she is fleeing her very interesting husband, our main character ends up being kidnapped by a pirate hunter, and it goes from there. So if you've been wanting to check out Pam Godwin, I highly suggest starting with this book. It is just so good. And then the other one is Bad Saint by Monica James. So this is following a woman that on her honeymoon, she ends up being kidnapped. And while she's on a boat that I'm pretty sure is heading to Russia, the boat ends up capsizing. And then the main character ends up stranded on this deserted island with one of her captors. And it's so good. So definitely check this series out. You can easily binge it in a weekend. It is just so spicy and angsty and just wonderful. All right, and next I'm going to combine two different tropes. So one I got a lot was Touch Her and Die. I'm going to combine that with Possessive Hero Who Only Has Eyes for Their Girl. So first up we have Promises and Pomegranates by Sarah Miller. This is a very light Hades and Persephone retelling. It is also a mafia romance. We are following Cal, who is a hitman for the mafia. He's also a doctor, and he's also kind of out of his mind and only has eyes for this girl that he's supposed to be guarding. So I actually wasn't a huge fan of this book, only because I was expecting like a very, I don't know, Hades and Persephone retelling. And this had very, very minor like Hades and Persephone's references. But Cal was everything. I love a psychotic killer who is just obsessed with his woman. So highly recommend. And then the other one is Dead Man Walking by Gianna Darling, which is the 7th book in the Fallen Men series, a motorcycle club series. So good. The next book, Caution to the Wind, is on hold indefinitely, but hopefully it'll be out this year. And Dead Man Walking is following Priest and Bea. Priest is also the hitman for the Fallen Motorcycle Club. He's also a little bit out of his mind, but he absolutely loves Bea, who is this just ray of sunshine, and it's just such a good story. I absolutely love it. One of my favorites in the series. Definitely pick it up. Next up, we have Grovel, and then Where They Fight Instalust, although they are fated mates. So I had trouble with this one. I immediately want to say A Court of Thorns and Roses, but I'm sure the person that said this has already read that. So let's do Smoke and Bone or Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. It has been quite a while since I've read this. This is an angel and demon. I think it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling, if I'm not mistaken. But there is definitely a connection between the two characters that they are trying to fight, and they eventually figure out what that connection is at the end. Unfortunately, I've only read this first book in the series, but I did really enjoy it. I should go back to it and finish this series up because I do really like Laini Taylor's writing, and this was a really fun time. So I feel like the series has kind of been flying under the radar. It did come out a while ago, but I would definitely check this out if you're looking for a very unique fantasy romance. Next up was really easy. So Dark Motorcycle Club Romance, It Ain't Me Babe by Tilly Cole. This is so dark and so good, and it's a motorcycle romance. So we're following Styx and Salome. Styx is the son of the head of the motorcycle club, and then you have Salome, who is this young girl that was raised in this horrible cult. And then when they're very young, they meet each other, and then years go by. Salome ends up running away from the cult and is found by Styx. And it is their story. It is so good, but oh so dark. I mean, this cult is doing some terrible things. We have SA, we have torture, and it's just terrible. We have unaliving, like not good. So highly recommend if you're looking for a very dark motorcycle romance. Look no further. All right, so next up we have Love Triangle, and I actually have 3 books for this because I couldn't narrow down which contemporary romances I want to pick. I recently read 2 that are just perfect for the whole love triangle trope. So first up we have Legendborn by Tracy Dion. So this is YA fantasy. It's following Bree that after the death of her mother, she ends up being accepted into this early college program, and when she gets there, she finds out that 1, magic is real, and 2, there are just demons all over this college. But luckily, there is this secret society that is based off the Knights of the Round Table, so like Arthur and Merlin, that are put in place to like kill these demons. And she joins. There is this love triangle in this book that is just so good. So highly recommend picking this up if you want a fun YA fantasy. The second book, I believe, comes out this summer, so I'm very much looking forward to picking that up. And then next up, we have Drive by Kate Stewart. So this is the same author that did the Ravenhood series, Flock, Exodus, The Finish Line. Such a good series. Just so good. Worth all the hype. Definitely read it if you haven't read it yet. So this one I also feel is better going in blind, but this is following Stella, who wants to make it as writing in the music industry. And then there's a love triangle between her, Reed, who is this like struggling musician, but he's also like super brooding and just kind of depressing. And then Nate, who's like this golden boy who owns his own newspaper. And there's a love triangle between the three of them. And this is probably the only book I've ever read that I didn't have a preference for who she ended up with. I feel like normally with love triangles, there's one right choice, or the author really alludes to the fact that she's supposed to be with this one person. I didn't feel like that with this. I feel like she could have gone with either one and I would have been really happy. So if you like Flock, Exodus, The Finish Line, I would definitely pick up Drive. So good. The second book is Bring Down the Stars, and I just want to thank Cheyenne, or That's All Book Girl, for recommending me this duet because it is so good. So it is by Emma Scott, super emotional. The first book is following Connor and Weston, who are just best friends. Connor is like super rich. He's kind of like the golden boy. His parents have a lot of money. And then you have Weston, who ends up getting a scholarship to this private school where they met. So they end up going to college, and Weston just has a lot of trouble like relating to people. He doesn't have a very sunny disposition, but he has a crush on this girl, August. So Connor actually starts dating August, but Weston helps him like write texts to her and poetry. So they kind of get stuck in this whole love triangle. And then the second book is where it gets so emotional. So they end up going off and joining the army, and that's where I'm going to leave it. So this love triangle is just so painful. This one, I clearly know who I want her to end up with, but still, if you're looking for a good love triangle duet, highly, highly recommend Bring Down the Stars. Next up is Marriage in Trouble, so I have two for this. First one, I actually didn't finish this book. So All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover. This is a marriage in trouble. The parts that I read, I did really enjoy. These two people meet under very interesting circumstances. They end up getting married, and then something happens that causes a really rocky relationship. So I'm very sensitive to the trigger warning for this, so I stopped reading it. I would definitely check trigger warnings before jumping in because I didn't realize what this book was mainly about. But what I read, I really liked. So definitely if you want like a heavy marriage in trouble, I would pick that up. The other one is completely the opposite. So The Romance Book Club, and this is by Lisa K. Adams. So this is following a man who finds out that his wife has been faking the big O in bed, and then he becomes very upset by this, and they have a falling out. I think they end up separating, and our main character ends up using romance books to try to get his wife back, and it's really funny and a really good time. So I only read the first book in the series, but I do plan on continuing and reading more because this was really, really fun. Next up is Step-Sibling Romance. So first up, we have Inked Lives by Gianna Darling. This is also from the Fallen series, and this is following Nova and Flower Child, who I always forget the name of. But they end up, Nova's family ends up taking our main female character in as a child. So they're kind of raised as step-siblings, and also it's friends to lovers. And then when they get older, a relationship soon blossoms. And this is very well written. Such a good book. This is my favorite in the Fallen series. Highly, highly recommend. And then if you want something that's a little bit darker, but is also Motorcycle Club, we have Sicko by Amo Jones. So I feel like this is another book you really want to go in completely blind. I had no idea what was happening most of the time I was reading this, but this is following a girl that is very close to her stepbrother, and then one day her stepbrother ends up disappearing when he's like 16. So she grows up, has a very troubled and interesting life, and then her stepbrother comes back and he's part of a motorcycle club, and it's really good. So if you want a darker step-sibling romance, definitely pick up Sicko. Next one is very specific. It is romantic slow burn, cat and mouse chase, like Hunt and Bryce, in the dark romance category. So I think the only reason I immediately thought of this book is because I saw Cat and Mouse. and that is Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. So I would not compare this to Hut and Bryce. This is much darker. Zane, our main character, is actually stalking our love interest, and it feels very like hunter-prey dynamic, so it definitely has that like dark romance feel, and they end up having some very interesting spicy time. Definitely check trigger warnings. This book is not for everyone, totally get it. Personally, I really enjoyed this one. The second one, Hunting Adeline, was a little too dark for me, but if you want a dark romance, cat and mouse, this is perfect. Next up is In a Relationship, but they're the only ones who know it. So I know I've read a fantasy romance that has this trope for some reason. I could not think of anything, but Maybe Someday by Colleen Hoover is a contemporary romance that does feature this trope. So it's following Sydney and Ridge. Sydney ends up moving out of her apartment when she finds out that her boyfriend has been cheating on her with her best friend, and she moves in with Ridge, who is a musician. He also is deaf, and they end up trying to make music together. Now, Ridge has a girlfriend, so he's not trying to get involved with Sydney in any way, but they can't stop their chemistry, and everyone realizes that they're kind of forming a relationship before they do, and I love Maybe Someday. It is one of my absolute favorite Colleen Hoover books. Ridge is everything. So highly recommend if you're looking for a coho book, check this one out. All right, so next up we have Friends to Lovers, but specifically fantasy romance. So I have Radiance by Grace Draven, which I just realized is also perfect for the arranged marriage trope. But anyway, these two end up having to get married in order to save their people, and they completely detest each other. They just find each other really repulsive when they get married. However, they soon become very close as friends, and then it leads to more. But this is really fun. This is probably one of my favorite Grace Draven books. I also read Phoenix Unbound by her. Not a fan of that one, but this one is so good and should be a must-read for fantasy romance. All right, so this next one is very long and very specific. So we have protagonist falls in love with the villain, but then the villain redeems themselves. Or the hero is actually morally corrupt and the villain becomes just. So the issue I had with this was I didn't want to say exactly why certain characters fit this trope because it is a huge spoiler. So I'm going to keep these explanations very, very vague. So first up, we have These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. I love this series so much. The second book is coming out soon. I have a full spoiler-free review. I'll leave in the cards and in the description. But it's following Bree, who ends up living in this world where a lot of people will make deals with fairies. However, she wants nothing to do with fairies. Absolutely hates them, which is very upsetting because her sister ends up being kidnapped by the king of the Unseelie Court. So our main character travels to the Seelie Court in order to try to save her, and it goes from there. But the trope I mentioned is at play here. So then another book or fantasy book that has that trope is Crescent City, Book 2, House of Sky and Breath. I enjoyed this. I thought it was really good, especially the ending. But there is a certain relationship in this book where we think someone is bad and they are actually not. So definitely check this out. I love this series. Once again, everything by Sarah J. Maas is just amazing. And then last up is a mafia romance. So we have Violent Delights, which is the first book in the White Monarch series. So this is following our main character, Natalia, who when she was very young, she believes she sees the person that kills her mother, Cristiano, who is her best friend Diego's older brother. And when she blames Cristiano, he ends up fleeing for his life. And then 20 years go by in which Natalia and Diego have just come closer and closer, or become closer and closer, and form this relationship. And then Cristiano reappears and says he did not kill Natalia's mother. And it goes from there. This series is so good. One of my favorite mafia series that I read recently. Just amazing. Very, very bingeable. Highly, highly recommend. And next up was When the Main Characters Are Competing for the Same Thing. So I feel like in a lot of fantasy stories, there are trials. So like A Court of Thorns and Roses, the end of that has trials. Fortuna Sworn, there's trials. Prison Healer, City of Thorns, all of them feature trials. And I love it. But it's never the main characters going up against each other. However, I did think of Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. This has two best friends that are competing to become the head dragon riders of their legion. And this is a really fun series. It is super political. The dragons aren't as relevant as I thought they were going to be in this book, especially based on the cover. This is definitely more of just going through the emotions of these characters and watching them make decisions and trying your best to pray they make the right ones. And it's a really good political story or fantasy, so highly recommend. Check this out. Like I said, I think the third book is coming out this summer. Another popular trope was student teacher. So I have an entire student teacher trope recommendation video. I'll leave in the cards in the description. But two of my absolute favorites are Dark Notes by Pam Godwin. This is dark. It's following Ivory, who plays the piano. She actually goes to school that's very prestigious and that she can't afford. And her new piano teacher is this very mysterious teacher who is very attractive, and he ends up taking a liking to Ivory right away. He's also into BDSM and tying people up, and it is just a spicy, good, and somewhat traumatic time. Highly, highly recommend picking this up. And then the other one is Sweet Dandelion by Michaela Smeltzer. So this is actually guidance counselor and student relationship. After a very traumatic event takes place, our main character switches schools and she has to see a guidance counselor every day. Luckily, the guidance counselor is Lachlan, and he is this like 30-something, super attractive, nice guy, and they end up forming a relationship. This is super slow burn, but so worth it. So definitely check both those books out if you're looking for a student-teacher trope. Alright guys, that is it for my recommendations. Please let me know down in the comments below if you feel there's another book that really fits with these specific tropes. And once again, thank you guys so much for responding. I was so excited I got to do this video. Now, I said this already, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!